For startups hiring engineers and engineers looking to join them, this podcast is for you.
Hey, welcome to Your Next Tech Startup. I'm host Isabel Rasmussen. Today we are going to do a second part on Can I Thrive in a Startup? So originally I had spoken with Mark, who is a fractional CTO, about what it takes as an engineer to thrive in a startup. Today I'm actually speaking with Isaac, who you've only worked in startups, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. And so I think that's just a really interesting perspective. He's going to share a bit about who he is and how that has related to him being able to be successful in startups. And both of our goal in this episode is really for people to listen to this who haven't been at a startup, or maybe one time you were at a startup, it was an absolute shit show and you don't know if you could ever go through something like that again. And so this will be an opportunity to kind of think through, is a startup potentially the next best move for me, especially I think in this time of AI. Startups can be an incredible opportunity for engineers to be participating in. So Isaac, why don't we start off with talking about when you finished school, you didn't even really know that much about startups and how you, I guess, fell into working in a startup?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like you said, right after finishing school, I think it's something a lot of people can relate to, where you're not really sure what to do next. You kind of it's okay, I've gathered all these skills. Now I'm supposed to just go out and find a job. And that was kind of the mentality I had. And at the time knew a little bit about startups, but I didn't know anything about the details. I've heard it's a place where it's a handful of people trying to do really big things, and things can move really fast. You'll learn a lot. I knew at some point in my life I wanted to try maybe making a business or something. So I was like, okay, this seems like a cool opportunity to learn what it takes to do those things, and also just have fun doing it. So I just happened to stumble across some listings on AngelList at the time for a startup, and I was like, why not? It was kind of aligned with some of my interests at the time, which is gaming and entertainment. And from there, I've only been at startups since I started my career as a software engineer.
The first startup you joined, you noted that at that time, you didn't really understand equity or really what it meant to be. I mean, I'm sure when you're considering salaries, startup salaries tend to be lower than obviously FAANG companies.
Yes.
And I think going in really for the goal of just being able to learn and grow as an engineer is the right mentality to go into it. And I know some startup founders don't want necessarily that engineer who's just I'm going to join a startup to get rich. They want that engineer who wants to learn and grow.
100% agree with that. Yeah. And I think in the loose research I did at the time, statistically, most startups fail. I believe that's still the case. So for me, it was never of this is my avenue to be a part of the next big thing and get super rich. It's a possibility, but it's not something I was betting on. And kind of like you said too, it's obviously money isn't everything. It's within reason. Those offers tend to be lower in terms of base salary, and they compensate or attempt to with equity, but that equity may or may not be worth something in the future. But at the time, I was kind of just viewing it as this is good enough. I'll get the opportunity to learn a lot too. And I was really more excited about what I would be working on and building than what would be going directly into my pocket, so to speak.
And in the other episode that we did about thriving in a startup, one of the things that we do talk about is growth and how quickly you grow as an engineer. I mean, and it obviously one startup to another, what stage that startup's at, all of that plays into it. And Volley was the first startup you joined. And what engineer were you?
In terms of what number engineer, at the time, the number of engineers was probably maybe 15-ish,
Okay.
maybe a little less, yeah.
So at 15, my guess would be kind of in 2 years of working there, you potentially got to learn and grow at maybe the equivalent that somebody else who graduated at the same time as you, who went to a bigger company, that 2 years of your growth was maybe 5 years of what they would have maybe experienced. And that's so hard to measure. But
Right.
did you get a sense of wow, I'm getting to do this and this and this, and other classmates that I went to school with are just doing this?
Yes, I think it definitely, I got a sense that it was like an accelerated growth path from just chatting with other friends that I went to school with. And like, it very much depends on the company you join and what kind of projects you work on at first. But I think a good comparison is like at a larger place that isn't a startup, you may have a very fixed set of responsibilities, a very particular project to work on. And while that can be comforting and in terms of like stability, I feel like you don't get exposed to all different parts of the tech stack. So I consider myself a generalist, which I really enjoy learning a lot about different things, like whether it's front end, whether it's back end, whether it's infra. And I think with a startup, because there's so few people, it's like, I think literally the first project I got was just like migrating an existing product to like a completely new platform. And it was just, they're like, all right, this is your thing. I'm like, all right, I have to figure this out. That's when I first started learning about Google Cloud, for example. I had never really messed with it that much before. I learned a lot about Google Cloud Platform and how to develop on there, how to deploy things on there, how to write code for voice platforms, how to think about like the deployment in terms of like Kubernetes and like scaling and stuff. So it's like all these different skill sets that are involved in bringing a product to life you may not get if you're like specifically tasked like, hey, you're the guy who writes the React front end code for this website or something. So it's like that's a very targeted thing. And while that's a very valuable skill set, and with any of these you can become very, very specialized, it's only one piece of the puzzle, so to speak.
And, one of the other parts about startups is it's hard to provide a lot of mentorship because the teams are so small. And I think early in your career, one of the things that gets tricky with that is who's going to help you figure out like a faster, better way of doing something, which I think personally the like first 2 to 3 years in your career, that is important. So I'm curious how that dynamic has impacted your ability to become a better engineer.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to call out because sometimes I've been at 3 different startups now. There's varying levels of support that you may get depending on just like who they have at the time. You may have a really involved, helpful manager. You may not even have a manager for some time. So it's like, I noticed throughout that experience, sometimes it would have been nice to have that support, but also if you're someone who's kind of very self-motivated and eager to like learn, you can kind of figure out where those areas are that you need to improve. So it's like, there's kind of like a gut feeling I get sometimes where I'm like, I'm not sure if this is the right way to do things. And like, I'll research, I'll Google, I'll look at documentation or just kind of like try to get other perspectives. Just to kind of, it's like, does this feel like technical excellence to you? And it's like, if you feel like you're kind of, because I think there's sometimes the saying or mantra in startups is like kind of the move fast, break things. It's like sometimes yes, but other times like you're doing the best with what you have, but you should do everything in your power to make sure you're like doing things well as you move along.
Now you're at the stage where you can be mentoring people where like you weren't able to, at a time that you didn't even have a manager, that like you were able to like use relationships that you had outside of work or in forums or something like that, where I think now a lot of people are relying on AI,
Yep.
kind of how you were utilizing your work, I guess.
Yeah. It was definitely like a combination of things. I had friends that worked not in startups, but in like maybe research areas, research laboratories and stuff, but still like within software engineering. And I think for me, it was just kind of talking to friends and also former classmates about like their experiences. Like, hey, how does it look when you're working on, like, what kind of things are you working on? Like, how is your team structured? Like, how your meetings go? Like, what the kind of things do you guys talk about in meetings, just to kind of get a better picture of what other environments are like. And it kind of helps me, there will be often a lot of overlap in terms of like, oh yeah, we do kind of Scrum Agile stuff, or we do like kind of sprints or etc. Sometimes it's not as structured. And I think that just kind of helped corroborate just different ideas just to make sure, are we going down a common path, or is someone going to join a couple years later and be like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a hard one, that like tech debt, right? If you focus too much on tech debt, then I don't think you're ever going to achieve what you need to achieve.
Yep.
As a startup, but you don't want to make it so that it's impossible for somebody to fix something 2 years down the road.
Exactly. And it's always a balancing act where it's like you will have to make those trade-offs. But I think as long as you're intentional about it and thoughtful, like it's okay. It's like sometimes people use the phrase kind of like cutting corners. And I think there are types of technical that are okay to take on if it's like, hey, we're going with the quicker approach now, but we're building in such a way that it's like easily replaceable, making sure you have a thing where it's like, if we start building this, that 5 months or a year down the line, we have to do a super crazy, like, complex database migration or something, or it's like you kind of put your back against the wall. Just trying to consider those things ahead of time, where it's like, what things can we do now to make our lives easier going forward without coming to a grinding halt? Because startups, they don't have the luxury often of time, right? It's like your funding is limited, your time is limited, and you're doing the best with what you have at the time. So just being very, like, thoughtful about how you allocate and spend your time.
That is something that clearly, like, you're really good at doing. Would you say, like, even potentially thinking about, like, how you were, like, as a kid, or anything about kind of like your ability to kind of be successful in startups that has always been a part of you?
That's a really good question. It comes with, like, genuine curiosity, I think, in terms of, like, I'm someone that, one, definitely just enjoys learning about a whole different things, but I think the way that translates into kind of what we we're just talking about with managing technical debt and different approaches, I think it's like, it's fun for me to explore different ways to solve a problem. So it's like, where the first thing you may think of may be like, oh, we have to do XYZ in order to build this thing. Just being curious and being like, is there another way, in terms of, like, I think a mantra I repeat to myself, I'm not sure exactly where I got it, was like, communicate early, communicate often, and challenge all assumptions. And I think that last part is the thing where that is the key, I think, to thriving at a startup, is like challenging assumptions, but within reason, not, always trying to, like, shoot down ideas. Is like, there's like a healthy amount of skepticism, where it's like, one may think that this is the only path to build a feature or to ship something, but it's just like, let's take a step back, explore. It's like, oh, actually, there's this API that exists that makes our lives a lot easier. Or wait, there's this library someone built that we don't have to build it from scratch anymore. So it's like, just making sure you take the time to do that before. I think sometimes I've observed people get really excited and passionate about certain ideas that are great. Honestly, they are really great, but realistically, the amount of effort it would take is not feasible for a startup at the time. So it's like, oh, we could rewrite this huge service in, like, a whole new language, have this cool framework and stuff to, it's like, but when you think about, we have maybe 3 engineers and it would take, like, at least a whole year to get something off the ground. It's like, can we afford to do that right now?
You're curious, and curiosity is something that I've talked to hiring managers a lot about it, and it's such a complicated thing to interview for. Asking someone, tell me about how you're is not exactly how you want to get there typically.
That's fair.
I think curiosity can be complicated to, I guess, measure, but adaptability, I think, is more,
Yes.
I don't know if tangible is the right word, but, like, when you were talking about being curious, I also heard adaptable. And in startup, there is that, this is really cool, but shit, we can't do it.
Yeah.
And the kind of the ability to adapt and flow with that. And that is something that I will say, definitely, as a tech recruiter, I have interviewed people that they clearly don't have that, and people who clearly do have that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that really comes through in how you talk about your work. That is why you're strong. And I think, those, like, listening to this, like, really thinking about where your happy place is going to be, if, kind of approaching problems and the way that you're talking about it, and wanting to, like, learn new things, like, switch quickly. What else? I see you wanting to
No,
say
I
something
think,
else.
yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And it's like, adaptability is a very important quality to have if you want to be at a startup. And it's something I did have to learn pretty quickly when I first started. Because I think, in all honesty, when I first started right after school, kind of, I was trying to approach things in that same manner, like with the same kind of, I guess, academic mindset, where it's like the things you learn, it's like, oh, this is the textbook way to do XYZ, or build a diagram or a sequence diagram, or et cetera. And kind of realizing that those don't translate as seamlessly as I had assumed, where it's like, I think there's a little bit of a split between, like, academia and industry. But, like, I think there was still a lot of things I could carry over, and realizing when it's the, time to take a step back. It's like, okay, maybe we don't need, that exact structure, where it's like, in school, you're in a sandbox, kind of carefully curated environment. And it's like, in the real world, you're not always going to be handed a clean slate, or be put in a situation where you can do things the quote unquote, correct way. But figuring out how to, it's like, okay, where do we want to be, and what steps can we take now to get there. I think just being willing to be flexible in your approach is very key.
And then I know one of the other things that like you've shared with me, I just want to build stuff and then having the freedom to fix things.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think to take a quick step back, just to like how I got interested in programming to begin with was like I'm really passionate about video games and stuff. And as a kid, I found an online tool that would like let you build video games, and it was cool for me to learn and figure out. It's like, oh, I can kind of put things together and see my little stick figures moving around on the screen, so to speak. And it's like that is something that I've always held as part of my personality. It's fun building things, creating things, and seeing how it adds value or joy to people's lives. So that's how I approach any opportunity. And it's exciting to be in a startup because you're so much closer to the work and how the features you build, and then seeing it manifest and come to life, and then seeing how people use your product, use the features you build. And then what was the other part of your question? Sorry, in terms
The
of
freedom to fix things.
Yes, and the freedom to fix things is because you're in a smaller or at a place with fewer people, you're just much closer to like decision makers, I think. Whereas I've kind of heard from other friends too, where like there can be a lot of friction and kind of bureaucratic processes at larger companies where it's like you got to go through a lot of different steps to, as an example, like, I don't know, change the look and layout of a certain button or something, where it's like that feedback cycle is so much quicker in a startup that it's like, someone can really just have an idea, and like if there's enough time and they're like, hey, is it cool if I just go like build this thing? And if there's enough resources at the time, then they're like, yeah, go for it, and that's exciting, where it's like there's not that much back and forth. You don't necessarily have to jump through a lot of hoops to just build something cool.
And I mean, and talking to people who, and this is a tricky one because you have never not done a startup. The biggest complaint that I'll hear is they were on a team, they spent 6 to 9 months working on something, and then that thing didn't ever go live.
Mm-hmm.
How have you experienced that in a startup, and how is that different than the bigger company where, it's 6 to 18 months that they're building?
Yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head there, where it's like usually that cycle, that time frame is much shorter, where it's like, let's try and rapidly prototype something within 2 to 3 months. So it's not as much energy has been invested up front, but sometimes it can go longer. Sometimes we start a project that maybe seemed easier at first, but then like 2 or 3 months in, you realize, oh, this is actually a much bigger thing, and you have to shelve it and table it. And I think because most people have already coming in at it with the mentality of knowing, I think it's very upfront. It's like, hey, this thing may not work. And I think that's something I've seen at startups just be communicated clearly, where it's like, it comes as less of a surprise if that happens. And it's like, and I think the people there are usually eager. It's like, okay, that didn't work, on to the next thing. So it's like, for someone like me who likes working, get bored if I do the same exact thing every single day, that's not much of it's like, yes, it sucks in the moment a little bit. It's like, oh man, it would be really cool. And it's like, it sucks that it feels like maybe the things I was working on for the past couple months are thrown away, so to speak. But I don't view it that way. I view it as like, even if it didn't ship, I still learned a lot from that process, and you maybe still got exposed to things that you may otherwise not have. I think just the framing of it matters a lot.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. And then I'm wondering, because in startups, there's that whole you're wearing a lot of hats, that you're oftentimes not able to 100% like be dedicated to one thing. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's easier to hold things a little lighter because like if you're working on 4 different things, it's like, oh, okay, great. Now I can just work on 3 different things.
Yeah,
Like versus like
definitely.
your whole life is that one thing, and then that goes away and it's like, well, what am I to do now?
Yeah, yeah. And
Is
I will
that the
say
case
though,
that typically you're balancing like when you've been working on one of these projects for 2 to 3 months, that wasn't 100% of your focus?
for me, yes, but I think every experience is different. I've also seen the other case where there have been times where I observed there's maybe been a whole team kind of built around a product idea that didn't take off. So that I think is the more challenging thing that I personally haven't experienced, but I've seen where it's like, this is now, the team was built around this thing that is no longer a priority for the business. Sometimes the people there either move into other teams or work on different products, depending on the individual. If those other things aren't something that they're interested in, then they may find themselves in that position where it's like, okay, well, I don't know if there's much else for me here then. So
And that's when they talk
it
to
can
me.
happen. Yep.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I always say I'm in the habit of, well, the last 2 years have been different because sadly I have talked to a lot of people who've been laid off, but pre the last few years, I was always talking to people who were just not happy in their work. So that scenario of like, there's not really something interesting for me to do here is something that I'm used to hearing, but that's because, I typically don't talk to people who are happy. But now I have the podcast, so I do.
Nice.
Okay, so and actually that was one of the other, as I'm like looking at the things that we had talking about happiness. You feel happier when you see the direct result of something. And a great example that you had shared with me was, and I think this is a really good interview tip for people who are, like I said, unfortunately people are laid off right now, are kind of trying to figure out what to do with their time.
Mhm.
So, still staying involved, building things can be a great thing to talk about while you're interviewing and unemployed. I don't think you were unemployed when you were doing this, but talk to me about the Twitch extension that you built.
Yeah. I actually was unemployed while I was building that. So yeah.
Okay.
So this was in between. I had taken a break after the first startup I worked at, and then
Okay.
I wanted to kind of stay sharp and still like build stuff. So I like games. I like being on Twitch, and I looked into what it would take to make one of those panel extensions that show up at the bottom of someone's channel. And I built something called Chrono Channel, and it's like a little React app that shows a countdown timer until the next person's stream. Didn't think anything of it. Come to find out, I actually checked right before our call, and like it's active and installed on like 800, almost 900 different channels. And I stumbled across one. It was like a D&D channel and I was like, oh, there's my extension. There's something I built. There's like hundreds of people in this live stream. And if they scroll down a little bit, something I built is out in the world, like adding value and joy to people's lives. So I was like, that was just very fulfilling to me. And all the roles that I've been at so far, I like being product focused, where I can see people understand what their pain points are. Oh, it's like this app or this program is so great, but if it had this feature, it's like knowing what I know and providing those skills to actually bring it to life is what brings me joy. And it's like, I think if that's something you resonate with, I think a startup is an environment where you'll find a lot of that.
No, I think that's such a great example. I think so much of who you are embodies what makes a great like startup engineer. And I think that's such a great example. And that I encourage other people that when they're in between roles to do things like that, because it is, especially if it can go live and get users in this AI time where like when I would say this was probably 18 months ago when I was doing AI like hiring, which, whatever, it was full stack software engineer, but for an AI startup. And it wasn't very realistic, I guess, to be like, oh, this person has to have done these things professionally. It's just a lot of companies weren't doing the work with LLMs and RAG and stuff like that at the time. But they ended up hiring someone who had built something more in like the B2C space involved. My goodness, it was like some kind of like saving documents or something. And so it was like a great example. It was live. It was something that like I could like download and use. And that opportunity to be able to do that, I think in the AI space is going to be temporary because over the next 18 months, most engineers, a good amount of engineers will have gained the experience professionally. And that professional experience will always outweigh the personal experience, or I would say with, I don't know, 80% of hiring managers, that is the case. So it is really a great time to do those things, have it be something that hiring managers can use or not use, but whatever, see.
Like interact with, yeah.
Exactly.
And I did want to share, yeah, that actually I did put that on a resume when I applied somewhere, and the interviewer did mention that. It's like, hey, yeah, we saw that, you built this thing, we looked at it, it's like, that was great, that was cool. So it was a talking point that stood out. And I think, as you were saying, even if it's not necessarily something that's directly related to maybe the role you're interested in, I think it's just like, it shows that you have the creativity and ambition to identify a problem and try and create and build something that addresses it. So it's just the process of going through that. I think sticks out to a lot of people. And it might not always, but I think it's like it definitely can help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know I'm a startup recruiter, you're a startup engineer. And so in our world, it sticks out. I have no idea if someone's interviewing for at like Meta or Amazon if they care. And I think it helps people keep a little bit of sanity during all of this as well. We've talked about being happy about direct results, it not being all about the money, it
Mhm.
being more about like growing and learning, and that passion to build stuff, see it live, and then of course curiosity. The one thing that we haven't hit on is kind of, not all startups are amazing experiences. So I think that just because someone has maybe joined a startup, it was a bit of a shit show. Um, that doesn't mean that startups aren't the right fit for them. And is there anything kind of like you wanted to say in regards to that?
Yes, definitely one wholeheartedly agree. It's like your mileage may vary, so to speak, where I think the size of the startup and also just like what's going on in the market at the time has a huge, huge impact on the experience you may have. And it's like, I would say give it another try if you're interested in terms of like, for example, I've started at very small and I've now at a mid-sized startup where like the first two I was maybe between 30 and 40th employee overall. And now where I'm at, there's a few hundred employees and there's varying levels of structure or process where maybe if you join at a smaller, earlier stage, it's just a little bit too unstructured for you, where it's mid stage or mid size. It's like there's enough process to where like you feel supported, but not so much that you feel like you're disconnected from the features you're building. It may just be the company you joined at the time, maybe a competitor was doing better and they had to completely pivot. So you join 1 month and then the next month you're doing something completely different. You never know what you're going to get. And if you get one of those unfortunate scenarios, it does suck, but it's not the end of the world. I would say keep trying at least a handful of times, because I've learned that there's so much to gain. I've got so much valuable experiences from this. It's been very valuable, but there's also been times where kind of things change. Or for example, one of the reasons I left Volley, my first startup, was just I kind of reached a point where I felt I wasn't doing as much of that kind of exploration and that things we talked about, like where I was doing a whole bunch of new things. I kind of got stuck in one kind of product area for a while and kind of doing the same thing. It's like, oh, I'm not getting that growth, that learning. It's time for me personally to kind of explore somewhere else and try something different.
And it's interesting because like you felt that there, but you're now at Retool, which is a bigger team, and you're not feeling that. So sometimes it is just like it's I think who you're working for, like who the, engineering leader is on the team can play a part in that. I think how different companies are structured can play a part in that. And, now that you're on your third startup, I just like this week had a CTO complain to me about how the candidates that they had, and they are the first person who interviewed these candidates, how they didn't ask anything. And so I want to like wrap it up with, now having had all the startup experience that you have, what would you say are, when you're interviewing with a co-founder, or, an engineering leader, what are questions that you think like are helpful for you determining, is this a startup where I'm going to be, you know, happy and successful in?
Yeah. For me, what I've learned, the most common questions I ask a little bit about the collaboration and the culture in terms of like how I ask about how are your team structured? Like, what are the size of your teams? Like, what does it look like in terms of, do people work kind of siloed within like one team? Or is there a lot of cross team collaboration? It's like, for me, I know I thrive in places where just because I'm on team A doesn't mean that I can't one week be helping someone on a different team build something together. And then also genuine curiosity, I think, about the product in the space goes a long way. I think it really shows when you have done your homework and you actually know what it is they're building and like are curious why. I think one of the first questions I asked was just, why voice tech? Like, what did you see here when I was interviewing at Valley? And I think that's like the kind of thing that stands out, where you can tell that the person is really trying to understand the space and what they're building and isn't just there necessarily just to collect a paycheck, so to speak.
Yeah. When you're speaking to a co-founder, why did you decide to build this? Like, why is this important? Obviously, in a way that doesn't make it sound like it's not important. Um, but is such a good question to ask because it's an opportunity for you to learn about it. And when you're in an early stage startup, you've been a product engineer, but understanding what the startup does and why they do it and the problem space is, I think, critical to being successful in the startup.
Yeah, and definitely want to just quickly plus one to, like you said, if you can use the product, definitely do it because that's something that they value a lot. But when you're within the company building it, like you're probably messing with the product every day, so you kind of get kind of that blindness to certain things, and it's like that's something they really value is like a fresh perspective. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this app? Like for as a first time user, it's like, did you find it easy? Did you find it confusing? Did you like the layout? That's like golden feedback that if you even took the time to do that, that speaks volumes.
Yeah. And I think it also allows you to showcase how you approach things, how you think about things. So you're providing them feedback, but they're also getting to know you and how you think about things. And that's important for them. So I know we've been talking longer than planned, but so happy that you and I connected, that you've come on the podcast, and that, I really hope people can like listen to your experience and that can help them kind of determine, if a startup or another startup is the right next move for them.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was very fun. Yeah, I'm hoping this helps people kind of understand what it's like working at a startup and if it might be a good fit for you.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.